Welcome to Your Next Chapter, where we spotlight audio creators and industry leaders shaping the future of podcasting. I'm JT, Jeremiah Tittle, the CEO of Next Chapter Podcasts. This season, we're exploring how museums are using podcasts to share stories, build trust, and reach beyond their walls. Because every museum needs a podcast, right? I think so. Today, I'm joined by John Russick, Managing Director of the Bronzeville Center for the Arts, based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and former Interim Executive Director at Levine Museum of the New South. This was recorded at AAM 2025 in LA. We reflect on how John helped spark Our New South from the get-go while he was at Levine, the award-winning podcast, which recently wrapped up its second season. Check it out. We talk about why museums matter, how podcasting can fuel institutional transformation, and the power of great storytelling in unexpected formats. Excited for what you're about to hear from John. Let's get into it. Well, we're here now in LA at AAM 2025 with John Russick, the Managing Director of the Bronzeville Center for the Arts, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And John, I have so many things to be grateful for in life. One of those things is you, John, and our relationship. We go back a little bit, a few years, and I don't want to give you too much credit, but let's go for it. Our New South, this podcast that we just won another award, by the way, for this show. Yeah, as of a couple days ago, we just let Frankie know. It wouldn't happen without you. I don't want you to, fend off these compliments, but I would like you to share a little bit about why you thought it was a good idea to do a podcast at Levine Museum of the New South.
Well, thank you for the compliment, but really what attracted me was the opportunity to really push storytelling in a new way inside the museum, right? Not physically inside the museum, to extend that storytelling out beyond the museum. I spent a truckload of time in my professional career promoting the idea of good writing, because I think museums often take writing for granted, and writing is our primary form of storytelling in museums. It's label copy, it's what the text is in the museum magazine, it's even in the marketing materials. How we talk about ourselves, how we try to engage people, it's really critically important. That writing's got to be accessible, it's got to be engaging, it's got to be creative. And but it's still from us to you, right? It's still, we wrote the text, we handed it to you, or you read it on our walls. And it seemed like podcasting is an opportunity for museums to experiment a little bit with how we share information. That it's not a transfer of information from me to you anymore. It's a dialogue that you and me could be in, maybe with some other people, and you could either participate in that dialogue as being on the podcast or in the podcast, or you could be sort of a voyeur and listen in and hear this great dialogue, this great conversation that is both sharing information, established information, but also potentially revealing new ideas, because there's smart people at the mic talking to each other, thinking creatively, and maybe there's a spark there where something really extraordinary and unique could happen. And I thought, it's a long intro to say, what I thought the Levine Museum of the New South needed was some real deep thinking about what it meant to be a museum in 2025, because they were in this transition moment. Like what kind of museum do they want to be, since they had a chance to sort of reestablish themselves and rethink what they were doing. But also they have this concept of the New South that needs investigation and interrogation and sort of pulling apart and putting back together and really helping people understand what it means to be a New South, the New South, and all the different ways that could take shape. And so it seemed like a podcast was a great vehicle for getting at some of that thorny stuff.
It's refreshing to hear from you, why there was value in this specific case study or in this instance, and how it's gone on now to be 2 seasons, hopefully more, winning awards. I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and I would love to know a little bit more about why are museums important to you? We're in this format in terms of recording video and audio here. We're doing our own storytelling in the moment. Museums through a variety of different media and channels, tell their stories. Why'd you get into it? Why do you like museums?
Well, museums are just quite possibly the most important spaces in American life, global life, potentially. That you think about what they are, right? They're bonkers, right? Like, what's the model of a museum? It's we're going to build a building, we're going to collect a bunch of stuff, and we're going to put it out and just let people come and look at it. And we're going to tell them a little bit about it, and they're going to pay to come in, and we're going to hope that sort of informal educational model is going to take root in the community, and people are going to love these places. And so unbelievably, that has happened, right? People think about museums as a central part of American life. They cherish their museums. They invest in their museums. They take their friends and their family to museums. And what's happening in the museum? It's knowledge access, it's investigation, it's curiosity, it's communication and dialogue. All of maybe the most important things in a society, in a civilization, sharing information, doing it in a way that makes you feel comfortable and that feels accessible to you and to your friends. And there really isn't anything like that. There's really nothing like museums in our world. So sometimes I think we take them for granted, and I think that puts them at risk. So I think museums as a model deserve our recognition, but they deserve our investment, because they won't just last forever. They're not like the Grand Canyon or the Mississippi River, where they're just there and they're always going to be there. They need care, they need tending, they need maintenance, and they need guidance, and they need money. And so they have to be successful, and they have to continue to be seen as a value in communities, or they won't be around forever. And there really isn't like a next thing you go to when the museum is gone. Maybe you could argue it's the library, but you're not supposed to talk in the library. You could argue that it's the bar, but you got to be 21 to be in the bar. So I really think there isn't anything like these spaces, and we risk a lot when we don't pay attention to them and we don't invest in them, because they're anchors in our communities.
How do we know each other? You told this story maybe the other night in front of some new friends or colleagues, but how did you hear my name? I know it's kind of an odd question because we know, but just for the audience that might be tuning in right now, it kind of proves the importance of relationships and obviously taking pride in your work, but would love to maybe hear your version of how you found me.
Yeah, well, I had never been on a podcast, or at least not that I'm aware of. I had never been invited to see someone produce a podcast. And then a DJ in California, Southern California, here in Los Angeles, named Anthony Valadez, I think his show was Morning Becomes Eclectic. He was really interested in the hip-hop scene in Chicago, and he wisely suspected that what was happening in Chicago's hip-hop scene and what made it so exciting and creative maybe had something to do with the city, and maybe a city, there might be some other sort of story behind this that was more historical than it was musical. So to his credit, Anthony saw his first stop in this process as being the Chicago History Museum, which is where I was working at the time. And so I had this great opportunity to tell him about Chicago's deep, deep, deep musical legacy that isn't the reason that hip-hop in Chicago at that moment was so important, but it's part of a rich tradition in the city to be creative in the musical arts. Great gospel music, great rock and roll music, great blues and jazz, and if you love music, I mean, the folk music in Chicago is important, right? There's great classical music. It doesn't matter if you're into music. It's a great city to be in. And so we got together, we sat in one of the galleries at the museum, and we talked about Chicago music history. And he was he explained how the podcast was going to work. I'd never worked on one before, and so I was just curious, so I asked a lot of questions. I saw the setup. I was like, oh, this is all this takes, it's like you and one other guy, and it was all mobile, and it was really slick. And then I heard the output from it, and it was extraordinary. It was just the quality of the piece that they created was so wonderful. And, I'd spent a lot of time thinking about, maybe we should build a studio at the History Museum to do better, higher quality production values on the things that we did produce. And here was this little mobile lab that just sort of set up in a couple of chairs and a couple of guys talking, and it was extraordinary. So, we were together for many hours, and afterward I just got it in my head that we should do something at the History Museum with a podcast. So I reached out to Anthony, and he said, if you want to work with somebody in this area, the guy you should work with is Jeremiah. So I reached out to you, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Really appreciate you coming on. And just to wrap up, I was just wondering, from your perspective, I don't know how you feel, like kind of the daddy of this podcast in a way. But, I'm really proud of it. I think you deserve a lot of credit. Try to give you that in this conversation. But I just wondered if anybody's reached out to you, if you've kept tabs on us, even if you moved on to Bronzeville, and if you've had any, anecdotal, feedback from anyone in your circle about it.
I would say that I've told the story of how this podcast came about many times, and it's always in the context of the Levine Museum's transformation. That it's central to that, and that it's not out of the box thinking to say, oh, we did a podcast, right? They're very popular right now. It's sort of the candy of the moment, right? But I do think something really special happened with Our New South that I don't necessarily see in other organizations. They seem, the podcasts that I'm aware of, and I think the podcasters that I've been in communication with, are working more around a model where there's a narrow band of information. It's a supplement to an exhibition. It's a audio expression of a publication. It's a little more targeted and a little more narrow. And I think what is extraordinary about this podcast is you guys are talking about the reason this museum exists. Without talking about it as a physical structure, you're talking about the animating notion and giving voice to that. And I think that in that way, it sort of sits separately in the marketplace, museum marketplace anyway, that it's really like if you want to understand what the Levine Museum is all about, you could almost send somebody to the podcast first, right? And that's a way in which I think some of the most exciting work that can happen in a museum, the idea that can actually happen in a digital form is pretty extraordinary. And I think you guys have done an amazing job, and the rewards sort of bear that out, right?
Thank you so much. Thanks, John. If you're interested in learning more about our Next Chapter Accelerator program, please go to nextchapterpodcast.com/contact and we'll reach out. Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Next Chapter. I'm your host, JT. Our executive producer is Nick Kastner. This is edited by Justin Cortese. We drop episodes every other week. Please follow the show. And thanks for listening.